James Berry was Maplewood's golden boy, successful, admired, and trusted. But behind the polished image, his life was filled with secrets, betrayals, and dangerous connections. And in the end, it wasn't a stranger who ended his life, but the man he trusted most, his own business partner, Daniel Price. James Berry was a man who seemed to have everything going for him. Born and raised in Maplewood, he grew up in a modest household but worked tirelessly to build a future far brighter than his humble beginnings. By his early 30s, he was running a chain of fitness centers that stretched across several towns, bringing him financial success and local fame. To the outside world, James was the definition of ambition and determination paying off. He was good-looking, charismatic, and always surrounded by people who admired his energy. He donated money to community events, funded scholarships for underprivileged students, and sponsored sports teams. Wherever his name appeared, it was associated with generosity and progress. People often described James as someone who lit up every room he entered. He was a natural leader, charming enough to make others feel important and driven enough to inspire respect. His fitness centers weren't just about exercise, they were a gathering place for the town. Clients saw him as a motivator, a man who cared about their lives as much as their health. Parents trusted him, teenagers looked up to him, and even town officials sought his advice on local projects. His life, to most, looked like the perfect blueprint for success. Behind this bright image, however, cracks were beginning to show. Success had brought James more than just admiration. It had also attracted envy. Competitors disliked his dominance in the market, and whispers circulated about how he had achieved his rapid growth. Some said he cut deals with the wrong people. Others believed he owed his wealth to connections that were less than clean. James ignored these rumors in public, brushing them off with his usual confidence. But privately, those close to him noticed he seemed increasingly restless, as if carrying a weight that could not be shared. At home, his personal life was not as perfect as the one he showed to the world. Friends confided that his marriage had grown strained, with long absences from home and late-night business meetings becoming the norm. There were hints of relationships outside his marriage, though nothing concrete ever surfaced. His wife, once frequently seen by his side at public events, had become a rare presence, fueling further speculation to the community. These details were little more than gossip, but for James, they were a reality he could not escape. Despite the shadows forming around him, James continued to expand his empire. He opened 2 more gyms that year, secured new sponsorship deals, and was preparing to launch a brand of fitness supplements under his name. To celebrate his achievements, the town organized a charity dinner, one he had personally contributed a large sum to. It was supposed to be another moment of triumph, a reminder of the man who always seemed to rise higher than anyone else. Yet, beneath the smiles and speeches, James was fully aware that not everyone in Maplewood was celebrating his success. Some people were watching him closely, waiting for the right moment to strike. On the night of November 12th, James Berry was scheduled to attend the highly anticipated charity dinner that the community had been preparing for weeks. His absence was immediately noticed. James was not the kind of man to miss an event where he was both sponsor and guest of honor. At first, people assumed he was running late, caught up in business as he often was. But as the hours passed and his seat remained empty, whispers of concern spread throughout the banquet hall. Calls to his phone went unanswered, and by midnight, his family grew uneasy. The following morning, the unease turned into horror when a jogger stumbled upon a car parked at the edge of an abandoned factory lot, its windows fogged and streaked with condensation. Inside, the lifeless body of James Berry was slumped in the driver's seat. The discovery shocked Maplewood. Police rushed to the scene, securing the area as reporters gathered outside the crumbling factory gates. The image of James was not one the community would ever forget. His throat had been brutally slashed, and deep stab wounds covered his chest, as though the killer had acted with uncontrolled rage. Blood stained the driver's seat and floor, yet the rest of the car remained eerily untouched. His expensive watch still clung to his wrist. His wallet and phone were in plain sight, and there was no sign of forced entry. To investigators, this detail was critical. This was not a robbery. It was deliberate, and it was personal. The way the body was left added another layer of mystery. James's body was not shoved away or abandoned. Carelessly, it was positioned upright, as though staged to send a message. Detectives immediately considered The symbolism. Whoever had done this wanted to make sure James was found quickly. It was as if the killer wanted the entire town to know what had been done to their beloved figure. The brutality spoke of hatred, of betrayal, or of vengeance too intense to conceal. As news of his death spread, Maplewood was gripped with disbelief. Vigils sprang up almost immediately outside his fitness centers, with candles and flowers left in his honor. Community members gathered to mourn, struggling to accept that someone they admired so deeply had met such a gruesome end. But alongside the grief came fear. If James Berry, a man of wealth and influence, could be targeted and killed in such a violent manner, what did that mean for everyone else? Rumors surged through the town, each one darker than the last. Some speculated it was the work of organized crime, tied to whispers of debts James owed. Others believed it was a crime of passion, the result of jealousy or betrayal in his personal life. Police, meanwhile, worked tirelessly through the night, combing the car for evidence. They took fingerprints, fibers, and swabs of blood, hoping to uncover the killer's identity. Yet, as the first reports came in, investigators were faced with an unsettling reality. There were no signs of struggle inside the vehicle. No defensive wounds on James's arms, suggesting he may have known his attacker. The thought chilled detectives and residents alike. The killer had likely been someone James trusted enough to let close. And that revelation shifted the investigation from the unknown dangers of the town to the familiar faces within. James S. Inner Circle. The investigation into James Berry's murder quickly became the most complicated case Maplewood had ever seen. Detectives began by examining his closest connections, and almost immediately, troubling details started to surface. James had been a respected figure in the public eye, but his private life told a far more tangled story. Every suspect seemed to have a reason to see him gone, and each lead opened the door to new possibilities, blurring the line between friend and enemy. One of the first names to come under scrutiny was Daniel Price, James's longtime business partner. At first glance, their partnership looked successful and balanced. Together, they had built the fitness empire that made James a household name in town. Yet, financial records painted a different picture. Auditors discovered discrepancies in the company's books, with large sums of money unaccounted for. Investigators uncovered evidence that James had confronted Daniel about the missing funds, threatening to expose him if he didn't come clean. Witnesses recalled heated arguments between the two men, some in public, where James accused Daniel of betrayal. For detectives, this provided a clear motive. If James had gone forward with exposing Daniel, it could have meant prison time and financial ruin for his partner. But Daniel was not the only person in James's world with a motive. Attention soon shifted to James's personal life. It didn't take long for investigators to uncover his affair with Claire Reynolds, a married woman who lived just a few miles from Maplewood. Friends close to Claire confirmed that the relationship had gone on for nearly a year, and despite James's attempts to keep it quiet, her husband, Michael Reynolds, had found out. Michael was a man with a well-documented temper, known to lash out in fits of anger. Neighbors reported loud arguments between the couple after Michael confronted Claire about her infidelity. Detectives began to wonder whether Michael's rage might have boiled over into violence, ending James's life in the most brutal way possible. The third thread of suspicion came from James's rumored ties to a loan shark named Victor Malone. Though James presented himself as a man of clean success, whispers of financial trouble followed him. Investigators learned that James had borrowed large sums of money to expand his business more quickly than his profits allowed. Malone was known for collecting debts through intimidation, threats, and, when necessary, violence. Several people who had crossed him in the past had turned up injured or missing. If James had failed to pay his debts or tried to break free from Malone's control, the murder could have been a warning to others who owed him money. With 3 strong suspects, Daniel, Michael, and Victor, the investigation became a web of lies, half-truths, and hidden connections. Detectives couldn't ignore that all 3 men had both the motive and opportunity to commit the crime. Yet the manner of James's murder complicated things further. The overkill of the stabbing suggested deep personal hatred, not just business enforcement. The staging of the body indicated planning, not blind rage. Each possibility raised more questions than answers. Was this a financial dispute gone deadly? A jealous husband's revenge? Or a message from the criminal underworld? As detectives worked through the evidence, they began to realize that uncovering the truth would mean peeling back every layer of James's life, exposing secrets he had worked hard to bury. The public saw him as a symbol of success, but in reality, he was surrounded by betrayal, envy, and danger. His murder was no longer just about one night of violence, it was about the enemies he had created, knowingly or not, in his pursuit of power. Weeks passed, with little progress, and frustration began to mount among both the investigators and the community. Maplewood demanded answers, but the complexity of James Barry's life left detectives chasing shadows. The breakthrough came when forensic specialists finished analyzing samples taken from beneath James's fingernails. Among the traces of his own blood was a foreign sample, small but undeniable. DNA testing revealed it belonged to Daniel Price, his business partner. This revelation changed the course of the investigation instantly. Daniel had been questioned before, but he denied any involvement and insisted that his relationship with James was strained but not dangerous. When confronted with the DNA results, Daniel claimed the blood came from an accident. He said he had cut his hand while repairing a piece of gym equipment days earlier, and that James must have come into contact with it. Detectives, however, saw cracks in his story. The injury Daniel described didn't match the timeline of the blood traces, and the odds of his DNA ending up specifically beneath James's fingernails suggested something far more violent. The evidence pointed to a struggle, one in which James fought desperately against his killer. As investigators dug deeper, they uncovered a trail of damning evidence that exposed Daniel's double life. Bank records showed large transfers of money into Daniel's personal accounts. Funds siphoned quietly from the business without James's knowledge. When James discovered the theft, he had gathered emails, financial documents, and testimonies to confront Daniel. For Daniel, exposure meant not only financial ruin, but also prison. Friends revealed that James had planned to bring everything to light at the charity dinner the very night he was killed. The timing was no coincidence. Daniel acted before James could destroy him. The brutality of the murder was another revelation. Forensic experts explained that the multiple stab wounds were not the work of someone calm and calculating, but of someone consumed with rage. Investigators began piecing together the sequence of events. Daniel had lured James away from the charity dinner, possibly under the guise of a private meeting. Once they were alone, the confrontation escalated. James fought back, leaving traces of Daniel's blood on his hands. In a frenzy, Daniel stabbed him repeatedly, then slashed his throat to ensure he was dead. What stunned investigators further was the way Daniel attempted to manipulate the crime scene. The staging of James's body, upright in the car, with valuables left untouched, was a calculated move. Daniel knew about the whispers of James's affair and his connections with Victor Malone. By leaving everything in place, he hoped suspicion would fall on either the jealous husband or the loan shark. He expected the brutality to be mistaken for a crime of passion or a mob-style warning. What he hadn't accounted for was the precision of forensic science, which uncovered the truth he thought he had buried. The realization left the community reeling. For weeks they had suspected outsiders, violent strangers, or dangerous criminals lurking in the shadows. Instead, the killer was someone James trusted, someone who had built his empire alongside him. The betrayal cut deeper than the crime itself. For the people of Maplewood, it was not just the loss of James Barry, but also the destruction of their faith in the bonds of loyalty and friendship. The trial of Daniel Price became the most talked about event Maplewood had ever witnessed. The courthouse overflowed with reporters, curious locals, and grieving supporters of James Barry, all waiting to see how justice would unfold. From the very beginning, prosecutors built their case with precision, stacking each piece of evidence like bricks in a wall that Daniel could not climb. The DNA beneath James's fingernails, the suspicious bank transfers, and the emails detailing James's plan to expose Daniel painted a picture that left little room for doubt. Each witness who took the stand chipped away at Daniel's credibility, portraying him not as a victim of circumstance, but as a desperate man who lashed out in a moment of fear and greed. Daniel's defense attempted to spin another story. His lawyers argued that James had enemies outside the business and that Victor Malone, the loan shark, had more than enough motive to kill him. They pointed to James's affair with Claire Reynolds, suggesting that Michael, her husband, could have been the real killer. The defense clung to the theory that Daniel's blood had been transferred accidentally, that his financial records were simply misinterpreted, and that prosecutors were unfairly targeting him because he was the closest person to James. But with every counterargument, the prosecution returned to the cold, undeniable truth. The rage-filled murder bore the mark of someone deeply connected to James, and the forensic evidence tied Daniel directly to the scene. As the trial progressed, Maplewood followed every detail. Newspapers printed daily updates, and online forums buzzed with debates about guilt, betrayal, and justice. For the community, it was not just about one man's crime, but about the unraveling of the image they once admired. James had been a symbol of success, yet his life was filled with hidden scandals. Daniel had been a symbol of loyalty, yet he became the ultimate betrayer. The trial forced people to reconsider how well they truly knew the figures they celebrated and trusted. The verdict came after only 6 hours of jury deliberation. The courtroom fell silent as the foreman read the words that would decide Daniel's fate. Guilty of first-degree murder. Gasps echoed through the room, followed by quiet sobs from James's family. Daniel showed little emotion as the sentence was announced: life in prison without the possibility of parole. He had gambled everything, and he had lost. The empire he built with James was dismantled, his reputation destroyed, and his freedom stripped away forever. For Maplewood, the conclusion of the trial brought a sense of closure, but also an enduring scar. The story of James Berry's murder was retold in hushed conversations long after the courtroom doors closed. Parents warned their children about trust and ambition, about how greed and betrayal could turn even the closest friend into an enemy. The fitness centers that once thrived under James's leadership slowly faded, reminders of what had been lost. James Berry's brutal murder became more than just a crime, it became a cautionary tale. It showed how success, envy, and secrets can combine into something lethal. Behind every smile and handshake, there may lie jealousy, desperation, or anger waiting to surface. For those who had admired James, the hardest truth was not just that he had enemies, but that his killer had once been the man he trusted most.